When I was 27, the stock market crash came. When I was 28, my personal crash came. Then I suppose I woke up. So when I was almost 30, I began to make my living from poems and stories. So I suppose you could call my talk this evening the story of a Negro who wanted to make his living from poems. For 10 years I had been a writer of sorts, but a writer who wrote mainly because when I felt bad, writing kept me from feeling worse. It put my feelings in exterior form and gave me an outlet that never came in conversation. I figured if I was going to make a living at all, any kind of living, I had to make a living from writing itself. So, of necessity, I began to turn poetry into bread. There was one other dilemma. How to make a living from the kind of writing I wanted to do. I wanted to write seriously and as well as I knew how about the Negro people and make that kind of writing earn for me a living. So I figured that if I was going to plan my strategy, I had to get away from Manhattan, far away from Manhattan. So on my way to Haiti, my friend Zell Ingram and I stopped in at Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, Florida, of which that most distinguished of Negro women, Mary McLeod Bethune, was president. That night I sat on her porch talking to Mrs. Bethune as she counseled me in her witty and wise and wonderful way, talking to this very puzzled and confused young man. The next morning I read some of my poems to the English class. This was the beginning of my learning to turn poetry into bread, because it was Mrs. Bethune the night before who said to me, "You should take your poems to Negro schools in the South. Thousands of Negro youth would love you and be inspired by you. You're young, yet you have already made a name for yourself in literary circles. You can show that a Negro youth can amount to something in this world in spite of our problems." I thought about what Mrs. Bethune said as we drove down that long, straight Florida road to Miami. Madam's past history. My name is Johnson, Madam Alberta Kay. The madam stands for business. I'm smart that way. I had a hairdressing parlor before the Depression put the prices lower. Then I had a barbecue stand till I got mixed up with a no-good man. 'Cause I had insurance. The WPA said, "We can't use you wealthy that way." I said, "Don't worry about me. Just like the song, you WPA folks take care of yourself and I'll get along. I do cooking, days work too. Alberta K. Johnson, Madam, to you." Well, we spent the summer in Haiti and a few days in Cuba, and 6 weeks later, Zell and I arrived back in Miami, tired, broke, and hungry. We starved all the way back to Daytona, more than half the length of Florida, and when we arrived, Mrs. Bethune received us cordially and sent us down to a nice meal and cashed a $30 check without questions. "Boys," she said, "I was thinking about going north myself in a few days by train. I figured I may as well ride with you and save that fare." Now, we had a car, a rather small car that only had one seat, a rather small seat at that. Now, Mrs. Bethune was no small woman, and Zell was rather stocky himself. Now, how the three of us in one small seat was going to make it in hot September weather from Florida all the way to Manhattan, I cannot fathom. "We'll make it," Mrs. Bethune said. So we set out with America's leading Negro woman as our passenger on our way to the north. What luck for us. Zell and I never ate so well. All Mrs. Bethune knew folks all the way from Daytona to New York. In fact, and they fed us meals that you couldn't believe. It's a Florida saying that whenever Mary McLeod leaves going her way to a friend's house, the chickens, sensing that she's on her way, go flying off in the opposite direction looking for shelter. All along the eastern seaboard, people would throw a feast for Mary McLeod. So whenever we arrived into any town late at night, without so much as an advance warning as a knock on a door, the leading Negro citizens would throw open their door for Mrs. Bethune and for us. A poet? An artiste? What an honor. You always were good for helping young people, Mary McLeod. Come on in. Make yourself at home. Have you had a bath? Would you like some food? Well, we'll get the beds ready for you all whenever you are ready. All the way to Washington. Now, Mrs. Bethune knew how to get things done. She once told me, "People always wondered how I managed to get these colored women clubs to moving in some of our backwoods southern towns, to get them to opening up their own schools, establishing libraries and community centers, doing something else besides meeting and eating." She said, "Whenever I'm presiding over a district meeting, I simply tell these women what I want done.